A mother stepped away from her baby for just 30 seconds. 30 seconds to rinse a single dish. When she looked back through the kitchen window, her heart stopped. Her German Shepherd was attacking her 17-month-old daughter, shoving her, throwing her across the yard like a rag doll. She screamed and ran outside, certain she was about to witness every parent's worst nightmare. But what she discovered in those terrifying moments would change everything she thought she knew about trust, instinct, and the extraordinary bond between a dog and the family that saved him. This is the story of Max, and how a rescue dog's split-second decision saved a little girl's life. But before we go on, we have a small favor to ask. Most people watch without subscribing, and honestly, we understand. But if you believe these stories matter and love our stories, then that one click makes a real difference. It costs nothing, but it helps us keep these stories alive. So if you're with us, please click that subscribe button. The morning sun filtered through the kitchen window of the Brady home in Shawnee, Colorado, casting golden streaks across the hardwood floors. Molly Brady hummed softly as she rinsed her daughter's breakfast dishes, the familiar rhythm of domestic life wrapping around her like a comfortable blanket. Outside, she could hear the gentle sounds of play, her 17-month-old daughter Lila's delighted giggles mixing with the soft padding of paws across grass. It had been exactly 1 week since they'd brought Max home from the shelter. 1 week since they'd opened their hearts to a dog who'd known more pain than most creatures ever should. Molly paused in her dishwashing, watching through the window as Lila toddled across the backyard, her chubby legs carrying her in that wonderfully unsteady way that only toddlers possess. Beside her, Max moved with quiet grace, a massive German Shepherd whose gentle eyes held stories of survival and hope. The decision to adopt hadn't been easy. Darren, her husband, had worried about bringing a rescue dog into their home with such a young child. "We don't know his history," he'd said repeatedly. "What if something triggers him?" But Molly had felt something the moment she'd seen Max in that shelter kennel. Something that went beyond logic or caution. It was recognition, perhaps. Or maybe it was simply love at first sight. Max's story was written in scars, both visible and hidden. The shelter staff had explained his background with careful, measured words. His previous owner had tried to train him as a guard dog, but had used methods that broke rather than built. When Max arrived at the shelter, he was underweight, skittish, and carried the invisible wounds that come from betrayal by those who should have protected him. But there was something else about Max, something that set him apart from the other dogs. While the others barked and jumped for attention, Max sat quietly in the corner of his kennel, watching, not with aggression or fear, but with a kind of patient wisdom that seemed far too old for his years. When Molly knelt beside his kennel during their first visit, he hadn't rushed to the gate or tried to lick her fingers through the chain link. Instead, he'd simply placed one large paw against the metal barrier and looked into her eyes. In that moment, Molly had seen past the scars and the sadness. She'd seen a soul that understood loss, that knew what it meant to hope for something better. "He just needs someone to believe in him," she'd whispered to Darren. And somehow, despite all his reservations, Darren had nodded. The first few days at home had been a careful dance of boundaries and trust building. Max never left Lila's side, but he maintained a respectful distance, close enough to watch over her, far enough to give her space to be a curious toddler. He didn't play with the toys they'd bought him or claim the expensive dog bed Molly had carefully selected. Instead, he seemed content to simply exist in their space, to be part of their family's rhythm. Molly had noticed the small things, how Max positioned himself between Lila and any potential danger, how his ears swiveled at every unfamiliar sound, how he seemed to anticipate Lila's movements before she made them. It wasn't the behavior of a pet, it was the behavior of a guardian. Now, as Molly watched them through the kitchen window, she felt that familiar warmth of contentment. Lila was exploring the far corner of the yard, her tiny hands reaching for dandelions that had pushed through the fence line. Max followed at a respectful distance, his massive frame moving with surprising gentleness as he navigated around her unpredictable path. Molly turned back to the sink, reaching for Lila's sippy cup. The warm water ran over her hands as she scrubbed away the remnants of morning milk and cereal. It was such an ordinary moment, the kind that makes up the fabric of family life. Peaceful, safe, perfect. But then something changed. The laughter stopped, Molly's hand still in the soapy water. The sudden silence felt wrong, like a discordant note in a familiar song. She turned back toward the window, expecting to see Lila examining a bug or picking flowers. Instead, what she saw made her blood turn to ice. Max was moving toward Lila with purpose. Not the gentle, measured steps she'd grown accustomed to, but with urgent, almost frantic energy. His body was low, his ears pinned back, and there was something in his posture that screamed danger. And then he struck. Max's shoulder connected with Lila's small body, sending her tumbling backward onto the grass. Molly's breath caught in her throat. For a split second, she couldn't process what she was seeing. This was Max, gentle, patient Max, who had never shown even a hint of aggression. But he wasn't finished. As Lila lay still on the ground, Max nudged her with his nose, hard, insistent pushes that seemed designed to move her. Molly's hands flew to her mouth. Every horror story she'd ever heard about dog attacks crashed through her mind like a tsunami of terror. The sippy cup slipped from her numb fingers and splattered in the sink. And then came the moment that nearly stopped her heart entirely. Max grabbed Lila by her diaper and flung her across the yard. Molly's scream tore through the morning air, a sound she didn't recognize as her own voice. Her legs nearly buckled as she ran for the back door, her bare feet slipping on the kitchen tiles. Every step felt like it took an eternity. Every second stretched into hours of pure, undiluted panic. "Max, no!" she screamed as she burst through the screen door. "Get away from her!" But as she reached Lila and scooped her daughter into her arms, something made her pause. Max wasn't advancing toward them. He wasn't snarling or showing any signs of continued aggression. Instead, he was stumbling backward, his movements unsteady and wrong, and then he collapsed. Molly's world tilted on its axis as she watched the massive dog fall to his side, his breathing shallow and labored. Confusion crashed over her like a wave. What was happening? Why had he attacked Lila? And why was he now? Her eyes swept the yard, searching for answers. And that's when she saw it, a flash of color in the grass where Max had been moments before. Red, yellow, and black bands that made her blood freeze in recognition. A coral snake. Red touches yellow, kills a fellow. The childhood rhyme echoed in her mind as the pieces of the puzzle suddenly, horrifyingly, clicked into place. Max hadn't been attacking Lila. He'd been saving her. The snake, one of the most venomous in North America, had been mere inches from her daughter. While Molly had been safely inside, washing dishes and humming contentedly, death had been slithering toward her baby. And Max, with his keen senses and protective instincts, had seen the danger first. Every movement that had looked like aggression had actually been desperate rescue. The shoulder check that knocked Lila down had moved her away from the snake's striking distance. The nudging had been attempts to roll her further from danger. And the final, heart-stopping moment when he'd grabbed her diaper, that had been his last-ditch effort to get her completely out of harm's way. And now he was paying the price. Molly's hands shook as she examined Lila, searching for any sign of injury. A small scratch on her cheek, grass stains on her clothes. But she was breathing, alert, alive. The dog who had saved her, however, was fighting for his life just feet away. Max's front paw was already beginning to swell, the telltale sign of envenomation. His breathing was becoming more labored with each passing second. Molly knew that with coral snake bites, time wasn't measured in hours. It was measured in minutes. She had to act fast. Clutching Lila to her chest, Molly ran back into the house, her mind racing through options. The nearest emergency veterinary clinic was 10 miles away. Could Max survive the trip? Could she even move a 100-pound German Shepherd by herself? She didn't have a choice. She had to try. Molly placed Lila in her playpen, kissing her forehead and whispering promises she wasn't sure she could keep. "Mommy will be right back, baby. I'm going to help Max." Back in the yard, Max's condition had worsened. His eyes were glassy, unfocused. The swelling in his paw had spread up his leg. But when Molly knelt beside him and spoke his name, his tail gave the faintest wag, as if even in his pain, he was trying to reassure her that everything would be okay. "I know what you did," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I know you saved her, and now I'm going to save you." What happened next would later seem impossible to Molly, a feat of strength born from desperation and love. Somehow, she managed to roll Max onto a beach towel and drag him to her SUV. Somehow, she lifted his massive, limp body into the back and then was able to get Lila in her car seat. Somehow, she drove those 10 miles in what felt like both an eternity and an instant, her foot pressed to the floor, her heart hammering against her ribs. The veterinary staff took one look at Max and sprang into action. As they wheeled him away on a gurney, Molly collapsed into a waiting room chair, her body finally giving in to the shock and exhaustion. The next 12 hours were the longest of Molly's life. She paced the waiting room, called Darren to explain what had happened, and replayed every moment of the morning over and over in her mind. The guilt was almost unbearable. She had doubted Max, had feared him, had screamed at him even as he was dying from saving her daughter. When the veterinarian finally emerged with news, Molly held her breath. "He's going to make it," Dr. Manning said, and Molly's knees nearly gave out with relief. It was touch and go for a while. Coral snake venom is particularly nasty. It attacks the nervous system. But we got the anti-venom into him quickly, and he's a fighter. Molly drove home without Max that evening, her heart heavy with a mixture of relief and remorse. When she arrived home, Molly handed little Lila to Darren's outreached arms, blissfully unaware of how close she'd come to tragedy. That night, Molly sat in Lila's room, watching her daughter sleep peacefully. She thought about trust, about judgment, about the way fear can blind us to truth. Max had every reason not to trust humans. He'd been hurt, abandoned, betrayed. And yet, when the moment came, he hadn't hesitated to risk everything for one of them. When Max came home 3 days later, weak but alive, the house felt complete again. Lila squealed with joy when she saw him, toddling over on unsteady legs to collapse gently against his side. Max, still bandaged and moving slowly, lowered himself carefully to the floor and let her snuggle close. Molly knelt beside them, running her fingers through Max's fur. "I'm sorry I doubted you," she whispered. "I see you now. I see who you really are." In the weeks that followed, the story spread throughout their community and beyond. Local news picked it up, and soon, people from across the country were calling Max a hero. Molly agreed, but not for the reasons most people thought. To her, Max's heroism wasn't just about the snake bite or the split-second decision to act. It was about something deeper, about choosing love over fear, trust over suspicion, protection over self-preservation. Despite everything he'd endured, despite every reason he had to be wary of humans, Max had opened his heart to their family completely. As Molly watched Max and Lila nap together in the afternoon sun, she realized that the rescue had gone both ways. Yes, they had saved Max from the shelter, given him a home and a family. But he had saved them too, not just from the snake, but from their own fears and limitations. He had taught them that sometimes the ones we're most afraid to trust are the ones most worthy of our faith. That healing doesn't come from perfection, but from the courage to love again. And that heroes don't always announce themselves with fanfare. Sometimes they come quietly, on 4 legs, with patient eyes and hearts full of hope. The scar on Max's paw would fade with time, but the bond forged in those terrifying moments would last forever. He had proven that love isn't just about the good times. It's about showing up when everything is on the line, about making the hard choices, about putting others before yourself, even when it costs you everything. In the end, that's what made Max more than just a pet, more than just a rescue dog with a sad story. It made him family. It made him a guardian. It made him a hero in the truest sense of the word. And every morning, as Molly watched him keep his gentle vigil over Lila, she was reminded that sometimes the greatest gifts come in the most unexpected packages. Sometimes salvation has 4 legs and a wagging tail. And sometimes, if we're very lucky, love finds us just when we need it most.